Hello, everyone. Got a few dirty jokes for you today.
So a 95-year-old woman at the nursing home received a visit from one of her fellow church members. "How are you feeling?" the visitor asked. "Oh," said the lady, "I'm just worried sick." "What are you worried about, dear?" her friend asked. "You look like you're in good health. They are taking care of you, aren't they?" "Yes, they are taking very good care of me." "Are you in any pain?" she asked. "No, I have never had a pain in my life." "Well, what are you worried about?" her friend asked again. The lady leaned back in her rocking chair and slowly explained her major worry. "Every close friend I ever had has already died and gone on to heaven. I'm afraid they're all wondering where I went." So the doctor, who was known for his extraordinary treatment of arthritis, had a waiting room full of patients. A little old lady, almost bent over in half, shuffled in slowly, leaning on her cane. When her turn came, she went into the doctor's office and, amazingly, emerged within 5 minutes, walking completely erect with her head held high. A woman in the waiting room, who had seen all this, rushed up to the little old lady and said, "My God, it's a miracle. I saw it with my own eyes. You walked in nearly bent in half, and now you're walking out of here, upright. What did the doctor do?" The old lady smiled and said, "He gave me a longer cane." So the other day, I stopped by Taco Bueno, just looking for a burrito. $5.37. That's what the kid behind the counter said to me. I dug into my pocket and pulled out some lint and 2 dimes and something that used to be a Jolly Rancher. Having already handed the kid a 5, I started to head back out to the truck to grab some change when the kid with the emo hair said the harshest thing anyone has ever said to me. He said, "It's okay. I'll just give you the senior citizen discount." I turned to see who he was talking to and then heard the sound of change hitting the counter in front of me. "Only $4.68, he said cheerfully. I stood there stupefied. I am 48, not even 50. Yet he called me a senior citizen. I took my burrito and walked out to the truck, wondering what was wrong with Emo. Was he blind? As I sat in the truck, my blood began to boil. Old? Me? I'll show him, I thought. I opened the door and headed back inside. I strode to the counter, and there he was, waiting with a smile. Before I could say a word, he held up something and jingled it in front of me, like I could be that easily distracted. What am I now? A toddler? Dude, can't get too far without your car keys, eh? I stared with utter disdain at the keys. I began to rationalize in my mind. Leaving keys behind hardly makes a man elderly. It could happen to anyone. I turned and headed back to the truck. I slipped the key into the ignition, but it wouldn't turn. What now? I checked my keys and tried another. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the purple beads hanging from my rearview mirror. I had no purple beads hanging from my rearview mirror. Then a few other objects came into focus. The car seat in the back seat. Happy Meal toys spread all over the floorboard. A partially eaten donut on the dashboard. Faster than you can say ginkgo biloba, I flew out of the alien vehicle. Moments later, I was speeding out of the parking lot, relieved to finally be leaving this nightmarish stop in my life. That is when I felt it, deep in the bowels of my stomach. Hunger. My stomach growled and churned, and I reached to grab my burrito, only it was nowhere to be found. I swung the truck around, gathered my courage, and strode back into the restaurant one final time. There, Emo stood, draped in youth and black nail polish. All I could think was, what is the world coming to? All I could say was, did I leave my food and drink in here? At this point, I was ready to ask a Boy Scout to help me back to my vehicle, and then go straight home and apply for Social Security benefits. Emo had no clue. I walked back out to the truck, and suddenly, a young lad came up and tugged on my jeans to get my attention. He was holding up a drink and a bag. His mother explained, "I think you left this in my truck by mistake." I took the food and drink from the little boy and sheepishly apologized. She offered these kind words, "It's okay. My grandfather does stuff like this all the time. All of this is to explain how I got a ticket doing 85 in a 40. Yes, I was racing some punk kid in a Toyota Prius. And no, I told the officer, I'm not too old to be driving this fast." As I walked in the front door, my wife met me halfway down the hall. I handed her a bag of cold food and a $300 speeding ticket. I promptly sat in my rocking chair and covered up my legs with a blankie. The good news was, I had successfully found my way home. So one early evening, a police car pulled up in front of Grandma Marge's house, and Grandpa Stanley gets out. The polite policeman explained that this elderly gentleman said that he was lost in the neighborhood park and couldn't find his way home. "Oh, Stanley," said Grandma Marge, "you've been going to that park for over 30 years. How could you get lost?" Leaning close to his wife so that the policeman couldn't hear, Grandpa Stanley whispered, "I wasn't lost. I was just too tired to walk home." So a lady goes to the bar on a cruise ship and orders a scotch with 2 drops of water. As the bartender gives her the drink, she says, "I'm on this cruise to celebrate my 80th birthday, and it's today." The bartender says, "Well, since it's your birthday, I'll buy you a drink. In fact, this one is on me." As the woman finishes her drink, the woman to her right says, "I would like to buy you a drink, too." The old woman says, "Thank you. I want a scotch with 2 drops of water." "Coming up," says the bartender. As she finishes that drink, the man to her left says, "I would like to buy you one, too." The old woman says, "Thank you. I want another scotch with 2 drops of water." "Coming right up," the bartender says. As he gives her the drink, he says, "I'm dying of curiosity. Why the scotch with only 2 drops of water?" The old woman replies, "Sonny, when you're my age, you've learned how to hold your liquor. Holding your water, however, is a whole other issue." So William's wife started noticing how forgetful he was becoming. Being the concerned wife, she convinced him to see a doctor. William was a little worried when the doctor came in. Sensing his patient's nervousness, the first thing the doctor did was to ask what was troubling him. "Well," William answered, "I seem to be getting forgetful. I'm never sure I can remember where I put the car, or whether I answered a letter, or where I'm going, or what it is I'm going to do once I get there, if I get there. So, I really need your help. What can I do?" The doctor thought for a moment, then answered in his kindest tone, "Please pay me in advance." So, our co-worker kept trying to get her mother to fly out for a visit. "No way am I getting on an airplane," was the inevitable answer. "Look, Mom, when it's your time to go, it doesn't matter if you're on the ground or in the air." "I know," said her mother. "I just don't want to be that far off the ground when it's the pilot's time to go." So 3 old veterans were swapping stories about their ancestors' heroic deeds. "My great-grandfather was a drummer boy at Shiloh when he was just 13, the first said proudly. Mine went down with Custer at Little Bighorn, the second boasted. The third vet shrugged. I'm the only soldier in my family. But if my great-grandfather were alive today, he'd be the most famous man alive. Why's that? His friends asked. The guy replied, because he'd be 165 years old. So at a nursing home, a group of seniors were sitting around talking about all their ailments. My arms have gotten so weak, I can hardly lift this cup of coffee, said one. Yes, I know, said another. My cataracts are so bad I can't even see my coffee. I couldn't even mark an X at election time. My hands are so crippled, volunteered a third. What? Speak up. What? I can't hear you, said a fourth. I can't turn my head because of the arthritis in my neck, said a fifth, to which several nodded weakly in agreement. My blood pressure pills make me so dizzy I can hardly walk, exclaimed another. I forget where I am and where I'm going, said an elderly gent. I guess that's the price we pay for getting old, winced an old man as he slowly shook his head. The others nodded in agreement. Well, count your blessings, said one woman cheerfully. Thank God we can all still drive. So a wife asked her husband, How was your golf game, dear? It was going great, Jack replied, but my eyesight's so bad I couldn't see where the ball went. You're 75, Jack, his wife said. Why not take my brother Scott along? But he's 85 and doesn't play golf anymore, Jack protested. He's got perfect eyesight, Tracy said. He can watch your ball. The next day, Jack teed off with Scott watching. Jack hit a solid shot down the fairway. Can you see it? Jack asked. Yup, Scott said. Well, where is it? Jack called, squinting into the distance. Scott paused. I forgot. So during my brother's wedding, my mother managed to keep from crying until she glanced at my grandparents. My grandmother had reached over to my grandfather's wheelchair and gently touched his hand. That was all it took to start my mother's tears flowing. After the wedding, Mom went over to my grandmother and told her how that tender gesture triggered her outburst. Well, I'm sorry to ruin your moment, Grandmother replied, but I was just checking to see if he was still alive. So two elderly ladies meet at the laundrette after not seeing one another for some time. After inquiring about each other's health, one asked how the other's husband was doing. Oh, Ted died last week. He went out to the garden to dig up a cabbage for dinner, had a heart attack, and dropped down dead right there in the middle of the vegetable patch. Oh dear, I'm very sorry, replied her friend. What did you do? The old lady smiled and said, I opened a can of peas instead. So Fred and Grady, two elderly friends, met in the park every day to feed the pigeons, watch the squirrels, and discuss world problems. One day Grady didn't show up. Fred didn't think much about it and figured maybe he had a cold or something. But after Grady hadn't shown up for a week or so, Fred really got worried, however. Since the only time they ever got together was at the park, Fred didn't know where Grady lived, so he was unable to find out what had happened to him. A month had passed, and Fred figured he had seen the last of Grady. But one day, Fred approached the park, and lo and behold, there sat Grady. Fred was very excited and happy to see him and told him so. Then he said, For crying out loud, Grady, what in the world happened to you? Grady replied, I've been in jail. Jail, cried Fred. What in the world for? Well, Grady said, you know Sue, That cute little red-headed waitress at the coffee shop where I go for lunch sometimes? Yeah, said Fred. I remember her. What about her? Well, one day she filed rape charges against me, Grady replied, and at 89 years old, I was so proud that when I got into court, I pleaded guilty. Grady slowly shakes his head from side to side and continues. The damn judge gave me 30 days for perjury. So I recently picked a new primary care doctor. After 2 visits and exhaustive lab tests, he said I was doing fairly well for my age. A little concerned about that comment, I couldn't resist asking him, "Do you think I'll live to be 80? He asked. Do you smoke tobacco or drink beer or wine? Oh no, I reply. I'm not doing drugs either. Then he asked, do you eat ribeye steaks and barbecued ribs? I said no. My former doctor said that all red meat is very unhealthy. Do you spend a lot of time in the sun, like playing golf, sailing, hiking, or bicycling? No, I don't, I said. He asked, do you gamble or drive fast cars? No, I said. He looked at me and said, then why do you even care? So a group of 40-year-old friends formed a supper club, planning to reunite every decade for a great meal and to catch up. For their first gathering, they debated where to dine and finally agreed on Hooters because the waitresses wear low-cut tops. 10 years later, at 50, the group reconvened. After much discussion, they chose Hooters again, drawn by its tasty food and excellent beer selection. At 60, the friends met up and debated once more. They settled on Hooters for its peaceful, smoke-free atmosphere. A decade later, at 70, the group discussed their options and picked Hooters again, appreciating its senior discounts and wheelchair accessibility. Remarkably, at 80, the friends were all still around. They gathered, debated as usual, and decided on Hooters because they couldn't recall ever eating there before. So when a grandmother was in her late 80s, she decided to move to Israel. As part of the preparations, she went to see her doctor and get all her charts. The doctor asked her how she was doing, so she gave him the litany of complaints. This hurts, that's stiff, I'm tired and slower, etc. He responded with, Mrs. Siegel, you have to expect things to start deteriorating. After all, who wants to live to 100? The grandmother looked him straight in the eye and replied, anyone who's 99. So an elderly Floridian called 911 on her cell phone to report that her car has been broken into. She is hysterical as she explains her situation to the dispatcher. They've stolen the stereo, the steering wheel, the brake pedal, and even the accelerator. She cried. The dispatcher said, stay calm. An officer is on the way. A few minutes later, the officer radioed in. Disregard, he says. She got in the back seat by mistake. So, a very self-important college freshman took it upon himself to explain to a senior citizen sitting next to him why it was impossible for the older generation to understand his generation. You grew up in a different world. Actually, almost a primitive one, he said, in a voice loud enough for many nearby to hear. We, the young people of today, grew up with television, jet planes, space travel, men walking on the moon. Our spaceships have visited Mars. We have nuclear energy, electric and hydrogen cars, computers with light-speed processing, etc. Then he paused to take another swig of beer, which the senior citizen took advantage of to say, you know, son, you're right. We didn't have those things when we were young, so we invented them. Now, you arrogant little fart, what are you doing for the next generation? So, two police officers saw an old woman staggering down the street. Stopping her, they can tell she has had far too much to drink, and instead of taking her to jail, they decide to just drive her home. They loaded her into the police cruiser. One of the officers gets in the back with the drunk woman. As they drove through the streets, they kept asking the old woman where she lived. All the old lady would say as she stroked the officer's arm is, "You're passionate." They drove a while longer and asked again, but again the same response as she stroked his arm, "You're passionate." The officers were getting a little upset, so they stopped the car and said to the woman, "Look, we have driven around this city for 2 hours and you still haven't told us where you live." She replied, "I keep trying to tell you, you're passionate." So while on a road trip, an elderly couple stopped at a roadside restaurant for lunch. After finishing their meal, they left the restaurant and resumed their trip. When leaving, the elderly woman unknowingly left her glasses on the table, and she didn't miss them until they had been driving about 20 minutes. By then, to add to the aggravation, they had to travel quite a distance before they could find a place to turn around in order to return to the restaurant to retrieve her glasses. All the way back, the elderly husband became the classic grouchy old man. He fussed and complained and scolded his wife relentlessly during the entire return drive. The more he chided her, the more agitated he became. He just wouldn't let up 1 minute. To her relief, they finally arrived at the restaurant. As the woman got out of the car and hurried inside to retrieve her glasses, the old geezer yelled to her, "While you're in there, you might as well get my hat and the credit card." So an elderly widow and widower were dating for about 5 years. The man finally decided to ask her to marry. She immediately said yes. The next morning when he awoke, he couldn't remember what her answer was. Was she happy? I think so. Wait, no. She looked at me funny. After about an hour of trying to remember to no avail, he got on the telephone and gave her a call. Embarrassed, he admitted that he didn't remember her answer to the marriage proposal. "Oh," she said, "I'm so glad you called. I remembered saying yes to someone, but I couldn't remember who it was." So, a man, 82, and a woman, 79, met in a retirement home, soon becoming firm friends. Within a short while, it was more than friendship, and after consulting with their families, it was announced that they would soon be married. Relatives and friends were thrilled, and arrangements commenced. The couple then went to the local pharmacist and asked him certain questions. "Can you help with gout?" "Yes," was the reply. "Good. How about incontinence?" "Of course." "Arthritis? Asthma?" And the list went on. Each time he agreed he could help. Finally, the pharmacist said, "Excuse me asking, but it sounds as though you've both got a lot wrong with you. I'm happy to help, but you should go to see a doctor." "Oh no, it's not like that," the both chorused. "You see, we're getting married soon, and we want to be able to put our preferred gifts and supplier on the invitations." So a man was walking in the street when he heard a voice. "Stop, stand still. If you take one more step, a brick will fall down on your head and kill you." The man stopped, and a big brick fell right in front of him. The man was astonished. He went on, and after a while he was going to cross the road. Once again the voice shouted, "Stop, stand still. If you take one more step, a car will run over you and you will die." The man did as he was instructed, just as a car came careening around the corner, barely missing him. "Where are you?" the man asked. "Who are you?" "I am your guardian angel," the voice answered. "Oh, yeah," the man asked. "And where the heck were you when I got married?" So a young man asked an old rich man how he made his money. The old guy fingered his worsted wool vest and said, "Well, son, it was 1932. The depth of the Great Depression. I was down to my last nickel. I invested that nickel in an apple. I spent the entire day polishing that apple, and at the end of the day, I sold the apple for 10 cents. The next morning, I invested those 10 cents in 2 apples. I spent the entire day polishing them and sold them for 20 cents. I continued this system of polishing and selling, each time reinvesting my profits into buying more apples." "Wow," said the young man. "And that's how you accumulated your fortune?" "Nah," said the old man. "My wife's father died and left us $2 million. So, 3 elderly gentlemen were talking about what their grandchildren would be saying about them 50 years from now. I would like my grandchildren to say, 'He was successful in businesses,'" declared the first man. "50 years from now," said the second, "I want them to say, 'He was a loyal family man.'" Turning to the third gent, the first gent asked, "So what do you want them to say about you in 50 years? "Me," the third man replied. "I want them all to say, 'He certainly looks good for his age.'" So an irate customer called the newspaper office and loudly demanded to know where her Sunday edition was. "Miss," said the employee, "today is Saturday. The Sunday paper is not delivered until Sunday." There was quite a pause on the other end of the phone, followed by a ray of recognition. "I'll bet that's why no one was in church today, too." So a travel agent looked up from his desk and saw an older lady and an older gentleman peering into the shop window, where there were posters of glamorous destinations around the world. The agent had had a good week, and the dejected couple looking in the window gave him a rare feeling of generosity. He called them into his shop. "I know that on your pension you could never hope to have a holiday, so I am sending you to a fabulous resort at my expense, and I won't take no for an answer." He took them inside and asked his secretary to write 2 flight tickets and book a room in a 5-star hotel. The older lady and gentleman, as could be expected, gladly accepted and were off. About a month later, the little lady came into the travel agency. "And how did you like your holiday?" the agent asked eagerly. "The flight was exciting, and the room was lovely," she said. "I've come to thank you. But one thing puzzled me. Who was that old guy I had to share the room with?" So 2 senior citizens were sitting on a park bench, soaking up the afternoon sun. One of them leaned over to his 85-year-old buddy and said, "So, I hear you're getting married?" His friend straightened up proudly and said, "Yep." The first man squinted. "Do I know her?" "Nope," came the reply. "Well, is she good looking?" he asked, curious. The old man chuckled. "Not really." "Is she a good cook?" "Nah, can't cook much at all." "Does she have money?" The groom-to-be shook his head. "Nope, poor as a church mouse." At this point, his buddy threw up his hands. "Then why in the world would you want to marry her?" The old man leaned back with a grin and said, "Because she can still drive." So an older, white-haired man walked into a jewelry store one Friday evening with a beautiful young gal at his side. He told the jeweler he was looking for a special ring for his girlfriend. The jeweler looked through his stock and brought out a $5,000 ring. The old man said, "No, I'd like to see something more special." At that statement, the jeweler went to his special stock and brought another ring over. "Here's a stunning ring at only $40,000, the jeweler said. The young lady's eyes sparkled and her whole body trembled with excitement. The old man, seeing this, said, "We'll take it." The jeweler asked how payment would be made, and the old man stated, "By check. I know you need to make sure my check is good. So I'll write it now, and you can call the bank Monday to verify the funds, and I'll pick the ring up Monday afternoon." Monday morning, the jeweler phoned the old man. "There's no money in that account." "I know," said the old man, "but let me tell you about my weekend." So when my sister Andrea got married, she asked to wear my mother's wedding dress. The day she tried it on for the first time, I was sitting with Mother in the living room as Andre descended the stairs. The gown was a perfect fit on her petite frame. Mother's eyes welled with tears. I put my arm around her. "You're not losing a daughter," I reminded her in time-honored fashion. "You're gaining a son." "Oh, forget about that," she said with a sob. "I used to fit into that dress." So 3 mischievous old grandmas were sitting on a bench outside a nursing home when an old grandpa walked by. And one of the old grandmas yelled out saying, "We bet we can tell exactly how old you are." The old man said, "There is no way you can guess it, you old fools." One of the old grandmas said, "Sure we can. Just drop your pants and undershorts, and we can tell your exact age." Embarrassed just a little, but anxious to prove they couldn't do it, he dropped his drawers. The grandmas asked him to first turn around a couple of times and to jump up and down several times. Then they all piped up and said, "You're 87 years old." Standing with his pants down around his ankles, the old gent asked, "How in the world did you guess?" Slapping their knees and grinning from ear to ear, the 3 old ladies happily yelled in unison, "We were at your birthday party yesterday." So an elderly gent was invited to his old friend's home for dinner one evening. He was impressed by the way his buddy preceded every request to his wife with endearing terms: honey, my love, darling, sweetheart, pumpkin, etc. The couple had been married almost 70 years, and clearly they were still very much in love. While the wife was in the kitchen, the man leaned over and said to his host, "I think it's wonderful that, after all these years, you still call your wife those loving pet names." The old man hung his head. "To tell you the truth," he said, "I forgot her name about 10 years ago." So, 4 widow ladies in a retirement home in Florida sitting outside, enjoying the day. A new man walks up and says hello. One lady says, "Are you new here?" "Yes," he replied. Another lady asks, "Where did you live before you moved here?" "I was in federal prison." The third lady asked, "What were you in prison for?" "I killed my wife," he said. The 4th widow then remarked, "So, you're single?" So, a distraught senior citizen phoned her doctor's office. "Is it true," she wanted to know, "that the medication you prescribed has to be taken for the rest of my life?" "Yes, I'm afraid so," the doctor told her. There was a moment of silence before the senior lady replied, "I'm wondering, then, Just how serious is my condition because this prescription is marked no refills? So two 90-year-old women, Rose and Bob, had been friends all of their lives. When it was clear that Rose was dying, Barb visited her every day. One day, Barb said, "Rose, we both loved riding horses all our lives. Please do me one favor. When you get to heaven, somehow you must let me know if there's horseback riding there." Rose looked up at Bob from her deathbed and said, "Bob, you've been my best friend for many years. If it's at all possible, I'll do this favor for you." Shortly after that, Rose passed on. At midnight, a few nights later, Barb was awakened from a sound sleep by a blinding flash of white light and a voice calling out to her, "Barb, Barb." "Who is it?" asked Barb, sitting up suddenly. "Who is it?" "Barb, it's me, Rose." "You're not Rose. Rose just died." "I'm telling you, it's me, Rose," insisted the voice. "Rose, where are you?" "In heaven," replied Rose. "I have some really good news and a little bad news." "Tell me the good news first," said Barb. "The good news," Rose said, "is that there's horseback riding in heaven. Better yet, all of our old buddies who died before us are here too. Better than that, we're all young again. Even better still, it's always springtime and it never rains or snows. And best of all, we can ride all we want and we never get tired." "That's fantastic," said Barb. "It's beyond my wildest dreams." "So what's the bad news?" "You're scheduled to lead the trail ride up here next Tuesday." So, a 92-year-old man went to the doctor to get a physical. A few days later, the doctor saw the man walking down the street with a gorgeous young lady on his arm. At his follow-up visit, the doctor talked to the man and said, "You're really doing great, aren't you?" The man replied, "Just doing what you said, doctor. Get a hot mama and be cheerful." The doctor said, "I didn't say that. I said you've got a heart murmur. Be careful." So, an octogenarian, who was an avid golfer, moved to a new town and joined the local country club. He went to the club for the first time to play, but he was told there wasn't anyone with whom he could play because they were already out on the course. He repeated several times that he really wanted to play. Finally, the assistant pro said he would play with him and asked how many strokes he wanted for a bet. The 80-year-old said, "I really don't need any strokes because I have been playing quite well. The only real problem I have is getting out of sand traps." And he did play well. Coming to the par 4 18th, they were all even. The pro had a nice drive and was able to get on the green and 2-putt for a par. The old man had a nice drive, but his approach shot landed in a sand trap next to the green. Playing from the bunker, he hit a high ball which landed on the green and rolled into the hole. Birdie, match, and all the money. The pro walked over to the sand trap where his opponent was still standing in the trap. He said, "Nice shot, but I thought you said you have a problem getting out of sand traps." "I do. Please, give me a hand," replied the octogenarian. So as a senior citizen was driving down the freeway, his car phone rang. Answering, he heard his wife's voice urgently warning him, "Herman, I just heard on the news that there's a car going the wrong way on 280 Interstate. Please be careful." "It's not just one car," said Herman. "It's hundreds of them." So, the preacher, in his Sunday sermon, used "forgive your enemies" as his subject. After a long sermon, he asked how many were willing to forgive their enemies. About half held up their hands. Not satisfied, he harangued for another 20 minutes and repeated his question. This time, he received a response of about 80%. Still unsatisfied, he lectured for another 15 minutes and repeated his question. With all thoughts now on Sunday dinner, all responded except one elderly lady in the rear. "Mrs. Jones, are you not willing to forgive your enemies?" "I don't have any." "Mrs. Jones, that is very unusual. How old are you?" 93. "Mrs. Jones, please come down in front and tell the congregation how a person can live to be 93 and not have an enemy in the world." The little sweetheart of a lady tottered down the aisle, very slowly turned around and said, "It's easy. I just outlived all those losers." So a very elderly couple is having an elegant dinner to celebrate their 75th wedding anniversary. The old man leans forward and softly says to his wife, "Dear, there is something that I must ask you. It has always bothered me that our 10th child never quite looked like the rest of our children. Now, I want to assure you that these 75 years have been the most wonderful experience I could have hoped for, and your answer cannot take that away. But I must know, did he have a different father?" The wife drops her head, unable to look her husband in the eye. She paused for a moment. Then she replied, "Yes, yes, he did." The old man was shaken. The reality of what his wife was admitting hit him harder than he expected. With a tear in his eye, he asked, Who? Who was he? Who was the father?" Again, the old woman drops her head, saying nothing at first, as she tried to muster the courage to tell her husband the truth. Then, finally, she says, "You." "So yesterday, I went to the doctor for my yearly physical. My blood pressure was high, my cholesterol was high, I'd gained some weight, and I didn't feel so hot. My doctor said, eating right doesn't have to be complicated, and it would solve my physical problems. He said, just think in colors. Fill your plate with bright colors, greens, yellows, reds, etc. I went right home and ate an entire bowl of M&Ms, and sure enough, I felt better immediately. I never knew eating right could be so easy."